I will now begin the translation and cultural adaptation of the provided script into American English, adhering to all the detailed requirements. This includes changing names, locations, currency, and cultural specifics to fit a United States context. The final output will be a seamless, first-person narrative, as requested. The new employee, her voice trembling and her heart pounding, looked at the large portrait in the center of the mansion. Summoning her courage, she asked, "Ma'am, why is my daughter's father in that painting?" The silence that followed changed everything. The bus screeched to a halt in front of the huge wrought-iron gates. Rachel Carter got off carefully, adjusting the skirt of her new uniform. It still felt strange to her to be in such formal clothes, so different from the jeans and t-shirts she wore at the coffee shops where she had worked until now. At 26 years old, she never imagined she would end up as a housekeeper in a mansion, but life rarely followed the paths one planned. She gazed at the imposing property that stood at the end of a perfectly manicured gravel driveway. The Harrington estate, with its 3 stories of elegant colonial architecture and gardens that looked like something out of a magazine, was intimidating even from a distance. Rachel took a deep breath, trying to calm the nerves that were churning in her stomach. The salary was almost 3 times what she had earned before, and for the first time since the birth of her daughter, she could afford something more than just getting by month to month. "For Annie," she murmured to herself for courage as she pressed the intercom next to the gate. A female voice answered almost instantly. "Harrington Estate, how can I help you?" "Good morning, my name is Rachel Carter. It's my first day of work." With a metallic hum, the massive gate began to open slowly. Rachel walked along the path, feeling that with every step she was entering a world that didn't belong to her. All around her, carefully pruned rose bushes flanked the way, and a central marble fountain shot crystalline jets of water toward the clear sky on that April morning. A middle-aged woman awaited her at the front door, wearing a uniform similar to hers, but with a different apron that indicated her superior position. "Welcome. I'm Carol, the housekeeper," she introduced herself with a kind but professional smile. "Mrs. Harrington is waiting for you in the main living room to give you your instructions personally." Rachel followed Carol through a marble entryway with a chandelier that seemed to hold all the crystals in the world. Her shoes, though flat-soled, echoed against the polished floor. They passed by several living rooms and studies, each decorated with exquisite taste that blended antiques with contemporary touches. "Here we are," Carol announced, stopping in front of a carved double wooden door. "Remember, Mrs. Harrington likes to be called Ma'am or Mrs. Harrington, never by her first name." With a light knock on the door, Carol announced, "Ma'am, the new employee is here." "Come in," a female voice responded from inside. The main living room was even more impressive than the rest of the house. Large windows let in natural light, illuminating blue velvet sofas, mahogany side tables, and a marble fireplace that dominated one of the walls. In front of it, seated in an armchair with her back perfectly straight, was Elizabeth Harrington. At 60 years old, Elizabeth maintained an elegance that spoke of generations of refinement. Her ash-blonde hair, pulled back in a perfect bun, didn't show a single strand out of place. She wore a navy blue pantsuit and a pearl necklace that complemented discreet matching earrings. "Good morning," she greeted in a serene but authoritative tone. "You must be Rachel." "Yes, Mrs. Harrington. Good morning." Elizabeth looked her up and down, with that evaluating gaze that Rachel had experienced in every job interview, but multiplied by 10 in intensity. "Carol has spoken very highly of you. She says you have experience in customer service and that you're a quick learner." "I worked in restaurants and coffee shops for 5 years, ma'am." "I know how important attention to detail and impeccable service are," Rachel replied, recalling the words she had prepared for this moment. Good. The Harrington estate has very high standards, Elizabeth explained, getting up with a fluid movement. Not only because of the value of the objects it contains, but because of the tradition of excellence my family has maintained for generations. Rachel nodded, trying to project confidence despite feeling out of place. I understand, Ma'am. I will do my best to live up to them. I expect you will, Elizabeth replied, walking toward one of the windows. Carol will explain your specific duties. But first, I want to show you something so you understand the importance of this house. With an elegant gesture, Elizabeth indicated for her to follow her to the opposite wall. There, arranged in perfect symmetry, hung several portraits framed in gold. They were oil paintings of different members of the Harrington family, as Rachel could deduce from the family resemblance they shared. The Harringtons have been a fundamental part of this region's economic development for more than a century, Elizabeth explained with evident pride. My husband, Edward Harrington, she pointed to the portrait of a severe-looking man with a perfectly trimmed moustache, continued his father's business legacy until his passing 10 years ago. Rachel observed each portrait attentively, nodding respectfully. Her gaze went from the patriarch to another smaller portrait of a young couple on what appeared to be their wedding day, and then to a complete family portrait. These are our children, Elizabeth continued. Helen, the oldest, lives in Europe with her diplomatic husband. And this one. Elizabeth's voice continued, but Rachel was no longer listening. Her entire body had gone still, and she felt as if the ground beneath her feet had turned into quicksand. Her heart began to pound so hard she feared it could be heard throughout the room. There, framed in gold and painted with skill, he was. The same dark green eyes, the same defined jaw, the same wavy brown hair that resisted being perfectly combed. It was him, without a doubt. The man she had known as Mike. The man who had disappeared from her life as suddenly as he had entered it. The man whose real name, origin, and life she had never known. The father of her daughter. Are you all right? Elizabeth's voice brought her back to reality. You've gone pale. Rachel tried to speak, but the words refused to come out. Her mouth felt dry. Her hands were trembling. With a superhuman effort, she pointed to the portrait while formulating the question she never thought she would ask. Ma'am, why is my daughter's father in the portrait in your mansion? The silence that followed was so absolute you could have heard a pin drop. Elizabeth Harrington looked at her with a mixture of confusion and growing indignation. What did you say? Her voice, previously serene, now had a sharp edge. Rachel knew immediately that she had made a terrible mistake. She had spoken without thinking, driven by the shock. But it was too late to take it back. I'm sorry, Mum, she stammered, but the right words wouldn't come to her stunned mind. Elizabeth turned her gaze to the portrait Rachel had pointed to and then back to her, her expression severe. This is my son, Joseph Harrington. He's currently abroad leading the international expansion of our companies, she declared coldly. And I assure you he cannot be the father of your daughter. You must be mistaken. But Rachel knew there was no mistake. Those green eyes, identical to her little Annie's, looked at her from the canvas with the same intensity that had captivated her 4 years ago. I'm not mistaken, Ma'am, she replied in a voice firmer than she expected. 5 years ago, I met a man who introduced himself as Mike. We were together for 3 months, and then he disappeared without an explanation. Weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. Elizabeth was observing her with a mixture of emotions impossible to decipher. Her posture had become even more rigid, if that was possible. That's ridiculous, she pronounced each word as if it were a sentence. Joseph would never use a false name. He's a Harrington. He belongs to one of the most respected families in the country. Ma'am, With all due respect, I would recognize that face anywhere, Rachel insisted, surprised by her own courage. My daughter Annie has his exact same green eyes, his same smile. The mention of specific physical features seemed to alter something in Elizabeth's stance. For a brief instant, a flicker of doubt crossed her gaze as she studied her more closely. "This is completely inappropriate," Mrs. Harrington finally declared. "I don't hire staff to listen to fanciful stories about my family. If this is some kind of extortion attempt—" "No," Rachel interrupted, horrified by the insinuation. "I never looked for Mike or Joseph after he disappeared. I didn't even know his real name or where to find him. This is a terrible coincidence." Elizabeth remained silent for a few seconds that felt like an eternity, evaluating the situation. "A coincidence, as you say, that happens to be extremely convenient," she replied in an icy tone. "You appear just as Joseph is about to return from abroad." Rachel felt the ground disappear beneath her feet again. "He's coming back?" she asked in a whisper. "This week," Elizabeth confirmed, carefully watching her reaction. "After 3 years overseeing our businesses abroad." Rachel's brain was working at top speed. 3 years away? That meant he was in the country when she met him, when he left her, when Annie was conceived. "I had no idea," she murmured sincerely. I needed the job to provide for my daughter." Something in her tone, or perhaps in the simplicity of her statement, seemed to slightly soften Elizabeth's expression. The older woman approached one of the sofas and sat down, motioning for Rachel to do the same. "Sit," she ordered, though in a less hostile tone, "and tell me exactly how you met this Mike." Rachel obeyed, perching on the edge of the sofa, so tense she could feel her back muscles protesting. "It was 5 years ago. I was working at the downtown coffee shop, near the main plaza," she began, remembering that day as if it had been yesterday. "He would come in every morning. He always ordered the same thing, black coffee with no sugar and an almond croissant." Elizabeth nodded slightly, and Rachel recognized a flash of familiarity in her gesture. Apparently, Joseph's tastes hadn't changed. "One day he asked me out. He told me he worked in finance, that he traveled a lot. He never talked about his family or his past," Rachel continued. "We were together for 3 months. They were the best of my life." She paused, feeling a lump in her throat as she remembered that time. The walks in the park, the simple but romantic dinners, the conversations until dawn. A romance that had seemed straight out of a fairy tale, until it ended abruptly. "And then?" Elizabeth pressed, with a curiosity that seemed genuine despite her obvious suspicion. "One day he just didn't show up. He didn't answer my calls. No one at the coffee shop had seen him. It was as if he had vanished," Rachel explained, reliving the anguish of those days. "Weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. I tried to look for him, but I didn't have a last name, or an address, or mutual friends. Just a name that I now know was fake." Elizabeth watched her intently, as if trying to determine the truthfulness of every word. Finally, she got up and walked to a nearby desk, from which she pulled a small photo album. "My son is not an irresponsible person who abandons pregnant women," she declared firmly, although something in her tone suggested she was trying to convince herself. "But if what you say is true, there will be proof." She opened the album and held it out to Rachel. They were informal photos, not official portraits. Joseph Harrington at different stages of his life: graduations, trips, family gatherings. "Do you recognize this man as the father of your daughter?" Elizabeth asked in a controlled voice. Rachel took the album with trembling hands. Every page she turned was one more confirmation of what she already knew. There he was, in an informal photo at the beach, with the same crooked smile that Annie had inherited. In another, celebrating what looked like a birthday, with that characteristic gesture of running his hand through his hair when he was nervous. Details that no formal portrait could capture, but that she had memorized during those 3 months. "It's him," she confirmed in a whisper, stopping at a photo where Joseph appeared relaxed, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, so similar to the Mike she had known. "This is the man I met." Elizabeth remained still, her face a mask of composure that barely hid the inner storm. She came closer and looked at the photo Rachel was pointing to. "That photo is from 5 years ago," she finally said. "Joseph had just graduated with his master's degree and was taking a break before officially joining the family business." Rachel nodded. The timelines matched perfectly. That's when she met him. A tense silence settled between the two women. Elizabeth got up and walked to one of the windows, her back to her as she seemed to contemplate the gardens. In reality, Rachel sensed, she was processing the information she had just received, evaluating the implications, considering her options. "Do you have any proof?" Elizabeth finally asked, without turning around. "Photos, messages, anything to prove your relationship." Rachel swallowed. She knew this question would come eventually. "I have some photos on my phone, of us together," she replied. "And Annie, she's the living proof. She has his eyes, his smile. She even wrinkles her nose when she's concentrating. Exactly like him." This last observation seemed to have an impact on Elizabeth. She turned slowly, and for the first time, Rachel saw a crack in her perfect facade. The possibility of having a granddaughter she had never known seemed to have finally penetrated the matriarch's armor. "How old is she?" "Annie?" she asked, pronouncing the name carefully, as if testing it for the first time. 4 years and 2 months, Rachel replied. "And you never tried?" Elizabeth left the sentence unfinished. "To ask for money? To extort him?" Rachel completed, unable to avoid a defensive tone. "I didn't even know who he really was. To me, he was just Mike, a man who disappeared from my life as fast as he had entered it. I didn't know he was a Harrington. I didn't know he had money or social position." Elizabeth studied her for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. "Do you understand that this situation is extraordinary?" she finally said. "I understand, Mom," Rachel nodded. "And believe me, I never imagined my first day of work would end like this. I came here because I needed the job, not because I was looking for Joseph." The tension in Elizabeth's shoulders seemed to lessen slightly. "Joseph will be back this Thursday," she informed after a brief pause. "I suppose he'll have to face this situation directly." Rachel felt her heart leap. The idea of seeing Joseph again, of confronting him after 5 years, filled her with a mixture of conflicting emotions, anxiety, resentment, and something else she refused to acknowledge. "What happens now, Mrs. Harrington?" she asked, aware that her future and her daughters were hanging by a thread. "With my job, I mean." Elizabeth sat down again, regaining some of her usual composure. "I think the most prudent thing is to keep the situation as it is until Joseph returns," she decided. "You'll continue working here as planned. No one, absolutely no one, must know about this conversation. Not even Carol." Rachel nodded, relieved not to be fired on the spot. "Of course, Ma'am. But," Elizabeth continued, in a tone that left no room for doubt, "I'll need to see that child, Annie. If she's really a Harrington, I have to meet her." Rachel tensed instinctively. For 4 years she had protected Annie from a world that had treated them with indifference at best, with contempt at worst. The idea of suddenly exposing her to this family, to this world of wealth and privilege, terrified her. "Annie doesn't know anything about her father," she explained cautiously. I've only told her he had to go far away. A shadow of disapproval crossed Elizabeth's face, but surprisingly she made no comment. Bring her the day after your shift, she instructed. We can meet at the guest house, at the end of the garden. It's more discreet. Rachel nodded, aware that she was not in a position to negotiate. I'll do that, ma'am. Good, Elizabeth concluded, getting up in a clear gesture that the conversation was over. Now, Carol will show you your duties. I hope this personal matter won't interfere with your job performance. It won't interfere, Rachel assured, also getting to her feet. Thank you for your understanding, Mrs. Harrington. Elizabeth's expression softened almost imperceptibly. 5 years ago, my son locked himself in his room for days, she said suddenly. When he finally came out, he announced that he would accept the position at our European branch. He never explained what caused such a sudden change. With those enigmatic words, Elizabeth called for Carol, who appeared so quickly that Rachel suspected she might have been waiting just outside the door. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Rachel followed Carol through the gleaming hallways of the mansion, learning her duties, memorizing routines and rules, all while her mind processed what had happened. The father of her daughter was not a simple finance employee who had abandoned her, but Joseph Harrington, heir to one of the most powerful families in the country, and in less than a week, she would have to face him. Are you all right? Carol asked when Rachel dropped a rag for the third time. You seem distracted. I'm sorry, she apologized, picking it up quickly. It's just the first day, nerves. Carol nodded understandingly. Mrs. Harrington can be intimidating at first, but she's fair. If you do your job well, you'll have no problems. If she only knew, Rachel thought, forcing herself to smile. When her shift finally ended and she left the mansion, the sun was beginning to set. She waited for the bus at the same stop where she had gotten off that morning, feeling that she had lived an entire decade in a single day. Arriving at her small apartment in a modest neighborhood in the south of the city, she found her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, watching television with Annie cuddled up beside her. "Mummy!" the little girl exclaimed, running into her arms. Rachel hugged her tightly, inhaling the smell of baby shampoo in her hair. Annie, in her favorite floral dress and worn-out sneakers, was her entire world. "How did you behave today, Princess?" she asked, kissing her forehead. "Very well. Mrs. Henderson taught me how to make bracelets with thread. Look." Annie held up her little wrist, where a colorful braided bracelet was on display. "It's beautiful," Rachel smiled, exchanging a look of gratitude with her neighbor. After Mrs. Henderson left, Rachel prepared a simple dinner for both of them, scrambled eggs with toast, Annie's favorite. While they ate, she watched her daughter with new eyes, identifying every feature she had inherited from Joseph. The dark green eyes, of course, but also the shape of her chin, the way she furrowed her brow when something intrigued her. "Tomorrow you'll meet someone special," she said suddenly, surprising herself. "Who?" Annie asked, curious. Rachel hesitated, searching for the right words. "An older lady. Very elegant," she finally replied. "She works at the house where I started today." "Is she your friend?" Annie always asked direct questions, another quality that Rachel now understood she had inherited from her father. "Not exactly," she smiled faintly, "but she wants to meet you." Annie nodded with the seriousness that only children can show toward mundane news. "Can I bring my rabbit?" she asked, referring to her inseparable stuffed animal. "Of course you can," Rachel assured, feeling a lump in her throat. In less than 24 hours, the safe, small world she had built for her daughter would begin to transform, and she wasn't sure she could protect her from what was to come. That night, after putting Annie to bed, Rachel sat at the small kitchen table and took out her phone. She scrolled through the gallery until she found the photos she had mentioned to Elizabeth. There he was, Mike as she had known him, smiling at the camera with an arm around her shoulders. They had been so happy during those brief months. A sudden memory assaulted her. The last time she saw him, Mike/Joseph had seemed distant, worried. When she asked what was wrong, he vaguely replied something about family responsibilities and difficult decisions. The next day, he disappeared. Had his family found out who she was? Had they forced him to cut off all contact? Elizabeth's words echoed in her mind. My son locked himself in his room for days. He never explained what caused such a sudden change. For the first time in 5 years, Rachel considered the possibility that Joseph had not abandoned her by his own choice. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, in a London hotel room, Joseph Harrington was finishing packing his bags. His phone chimed with a message notification. It was from his mother. Joseph, I need you to move your return up. Important matters have come up that require your immediate presence. He frowned, intrigued. His mother had never been one for exaggerations or unnecessary urgency. If she said it was important, it was. He checked his schedule and replied, I can get a flight tomorrow night. I'll arrive Wednesday morning. Is everything okay? The response took only a few seconds. Everything is fine. Just come back as soon as possible. Joseph put the phone down on the bed, with a strange sense of unease. As he put away his last belongings, his gaze fell on a small object he always carried with him, a cardboard coaster from a downtown coffee shop, with a name scribbled on the back. Rachel. He had kept it for 5 years, unable to get rid of it, unable to forget what could have been. The only tangible memory of the woman he had loved and been forced to leave without explanation, out of loyalty to a last name he sometimes felt, was more of a prison than a privilege. He didn't know that in less than 2 days, the past he had tried to bury would be waiting for him in his own home. The next morning, Rachel arrived at the Harrington estate with a mixture of nervousness and determination. She had slept little, tormented by unanswered questions and imaginary scenarios. How would Joseph react to seeing her after 5 years? What would he say when he found out he had a daughter? And perhaps the most disturbing question, why had he really abandoned her? Carol was waiting for her at the service entrance with a list of tasks for the day. Good morning, Rachel, the housekeeper greeted. Today you'll be in charge of cleaning the East Wing. Mrs. Harrington has said it needs special attention because Mr. Joseph will be back soon. The name made Rachel tense up involuntarily. When exactly? She asked, trying to sound casual. Thursday morning, Carol replied, consulting her agenda. Although between us, I wouldn't be surprised if he arrived earlier. Mrs. Harrington has been moving heaven and earth to get him to come back sooner. Rachel nodded, internally grateful for the information. 2 days. She had 2 days to prepare herself mentally and emotionally for the reunion. Throughout the morning, she followed Carol's instructions, meticulously cleaning rooms that already seemed spotless. When she reached what Carol had identified as Mr. Joseph's suite, her hands trembled slightly. Entering the private space of the man she had known as Mike, but who was really Joseph Harrington, felt surreal. The room was large and elegant, though surprisingly sober for someone of his position. A king-sized bed dominated the center, flanked by minimalist nightstands. A mahogany desk by the window was perfectly organized, with just a closed laptop and a picture frame face down. Rachel moved around the room as if she were in a museum, afraid to touch anything more than necessary. As she changed the sheets, she couldn't help but notice the scent that still lingered on the pillow, a fragrance of wood and citrus that immediately transported her back 5 years, to the nights they had shared in her small apartment. The temptation to check the picture frame was almost unbearable. Finally, under the pretext of dusting, she lifted it. The photograph showed Joseph with his parents at what looked like a graduation ceremony. But what caught her attention was a small object half hidden behind the frame, a worn cardboard coaster. She recognized it instantly. It was from the coffee shop where she had worked, where they had met. With trembling hands, she turned it over and confirmed what she already knew. On the back was her name, Rachel, in her own handwriting. He had kept it. For 5 years, Joseph had held on to this small memento of her. "What are you doing?" Elizabeth's voice startled her so much she almost dropped the picture frame. She quickly turned, putting it back in its original place. "Mrs. Harrington, I was just cleaning," she stammered, feeling the heat rise to her cheeks. Elizabeth observed her with an inscrutable expression. Then her gaze swept the room, stopping briefly at the picture frame. "Did you find anything interesting?" she asked in a neutral tone, though her eyes were shining with shrewdness. Rachel hesitated. Lying would be useless. Mrs. Harrington was too perceptive. "A coaster," she finally replied, "with my name on it. He kept it." Something indefinable crossed Elizabeth's face. Surprise, confirmation, resignation. "Joseph has never been one to throw away memories easily," she commented, walking to the window. "Or people." "What do you mean?" Rachel asked, intrigued by this revealing comment. Elizabeth remained silent for a few moments, as if debating internally how much to share. "My son has changed since he returned from New York 5 years ago," she finally said. "He became more reserved, more distant. He accepted the position in Europe without hesitation, although he had always said he preferred to stay here." Rachel processed this information, connecting it to the abrupt end of her relationship. "I thought he had abandoned me because he had gotten tired of me," she confessed in a low voice. "That I had just been a pastime." "The Harringtons don't treat people as pastimes," Elizabeth replied with a certain stiffness. "We have our flaws, but frivolity isn't one of them." She turned to Rachel, studying her as if she were truly seeing her for the first time. "I understand now why he was interested in you," she added, in a tone that was almost approving. "You have character. You're not easily intimidated." Rachel didn't know how to respond to this unexpected compliment. "Finish up here and then go to the kitchen," Elizabeth continued, returning to her usual authoritative tone. "I'll be waiting for you at the guest house at 5, as we agreed." When Elizabeth left, Rachel exhaled slowly, not having realized she had been holding her breath. The conversation had revealed more than she expected. Maybe Joseph hadn't abandoned her voluntarily. Maybe there had been circumstances she didn't know about. The rest of the day passed in a haze of mechanical tasks and turbulent thoughts. At 4:30, Rachel asked Carol for permission to leave a little early, explaining that she had to pick up her daughter. The housekeeper, unaware of the true situation, agreed without a problem. Annie was waiting at Mrs. Henderson's house, drawing diligently in her favourite notebook. When she saw her mother, she jumped off the chair with excitement. "Mummy, look what I made," she exclaimed, showing a colourful drawing of what appeared to be a family, a tall figure that must have been Rachel, and a small one that was herself. "It's beautiful, sweetie," Rachel smiled, noticing with a lump in her throat that Annie had also drawn a third figure, taller and set apart. "Who is this?" "It's Daddy," Annie replied with childlike naturalness. "Mrs. Henderson says all kids have a daddy, even if they're far away." Rachel exchanged a look with her neighbour, who shrugged with an apologetic expression. "Kids ask questions," the older woman explained. "I just told her that her daddy loved her, but that he had to go far away." "It's okay," Rachel assured, though she felt a mixture of conflicting emotions. Thanks for watching her today. As they walked to the bus stop, Annie skipped along excitedly, her stuffed rabbit securely hugged against her chest. "Where are we going, Mummy?" she asked, always curious. "We're going to visit a lady at the house where I work," Rachel explained, choosing her words carefully. "She's an older lady and very elegant." "Like a grandma?" The innocent question made Rachel almost stumble. Like a grandma? If only Annie knew how close she was to the truth. "Yes, sweetie, like a grandma," she finally replied. During the bus ride, Rachel watched her daughter, who was fascinated by the urban landscape through the window. Annie was a bright and perceptive girl. At 4 years old, she could already read simple words and showed an insatiable curiosity about the world. Despite the financial difficulties, Rachel had made an effort to make sure she never lacked the essentials: love, security, and stimulation for her developing mind. How would her life change if the Harringtons accepted her? Would it be for the better? Money and social position weren't everything, but she couldn't deny that the education, opportunities, and comforts they could offer her would be immensely valuable. Upon arriving at the mansion, Rachel headed directly to the back of the garden, avoiding the main entrance. The guest house turned out to be an elegant two-story building, smaller than the main mansion, but equally luxurious. Elizabeth Harrington was waiting for them on the porch, dressed in a cream-coloured pantsuit that contrasted elegantly with her silver hair. Upon seeing them approach, her gaze immediately fixed on Annie, studying her with an intensity that made Rachel instinctively squeeze her daughter's hand. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Harrington," Rachel greeted formally. "Good afternoon," Elizabeth replied, without taking her eyes off the child. "You must be Annie." The little girl, suddenly shy, partially hid behind her mother's leg. "Say hello to Mrs. Harrington, sweetie," Rachel encouraged her gently. "Good afternoon," Annie murmured, clutching her stuffed rabbit to her chest like a shield. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Elizabeth seemed unable to stop looking at the little girl, as if she were looking for something specific in her features. "Come in, please," she finally said, regaining her composure. "I've prepared some cookies and juice." The inside of the guest house was cozy and elegantly decorated. In the main living room, a coffee table had been set with a tray of freshly baked cookies, a pitcher of juice, and 3 glasses. Annie, momentarily forgetting her shyness at the sight of the cookies, looked at her mother for permission. "You can have one, sweetie," Rachel smiled. The little girl carefully approached the table, took a cookie, and took a small bite. "They're yummy," she declared with a smile that revealed the dimples in her cheeks, identical to her father's. Elizabeth brought a hand to her chest, visibly affected by this familiar gesture. "They've been Joseph's favourite since he was little," she commented in a slightly trembling voice. "Our cook used to make them for special occasions." Rachel understood then that Elizabeth had specifically prepared these cookies as another test. If Annie shared Joseph's tastes, it would be another confirmation of their kinship. "Can I see your drawings?" Elizabeth asked, pointing to the small backpack Annie was carrying, where her notebook was peeking out. The little girl hesitated, looking at her mother. "It's okay. You can show her," Rachel nodded. Annie proudly took out her notebook and opened it on the table. They were typical drawings for a girl her age: houses with smoking chimneys, giant flowers, animals with impossible proportions. But what caught Elizabeth's attention was one particular drawing, a structure that looked like a building with clean lines and geometric shapes, surprisingly sophisticated for someone so young. "Did you draw this?" Elizabeth asked, genuinely amazed. "It's my dream house," Annie explained with seriousness. "When I grow up, I'm going to build beautiful houses." Rachel and Elizabeth exchanged a meaningful look. Joseph had shown the same talent and interest in architecture from an early age, before the family business steered him toward finance. She has his eyes, Elizabeth murmured, so softly that Rachel could barely hear her. And his spirit? At that moment, the sound of a phone broke the intimate atmosphere that had been created. Elizabeth took her mobile out of her pocket, and upon looking at the screen, her expression changed completely. "Excuse me," she said, getting up hurriedly. "I have to take this call." She walked a few steps away, turning her back, but Rachel could catch fragments of the conversation. "Already on your way?" "But I thought—" "Yes, I understand." "No, no problem." A brief silence. "Is someone here who—" "No, not on the phone." "When you get here." After hanging up, Elizabeth turned to them, her face a mask of composure that barely hid her inner agitation. "There's been a change of plans," she announced in a controlled voice. "Joseph will arrive tomorrow morning." He was able to move his flight up. Rachel felt the ground sway beneath her feet. She wasn't ready. Not so soon. She needed more time to process everything, to decide what to say, how to act. "Tomorrow," she repeated, unable to articulate a more coherent response. "It's better that you go home now," Elizabeth said, suddenly pragmatic. "But I need you to be here first thing in the morning, at 8. Without Annie, for now. He has to talk to you first." "Who's coming tomorrow, Mummy?" Annie asked, oblivious to the tension that had settled in the room. Rachel looked at her daughter, then at Elizabeth, trapped in a moment of inevitable truth. "An old friend, sweetie," she finally replied. "Someone Mummy knew a long time ago." Rachel barely slept that night. The hours slipped away like sand through her fingers as her mind went over and over what she would say when she saw Joseph again. Would she confront him with the anger accumulated over 5 years? Would she demand an explanation for leaving her without a word? Or would she try to understand his reasons first? Annie slept peacefully in the bed they shared, oblivious to the emotional whirlwind shaking her mother. Rachel looked at her serene face, so similar to the man she would soon confront, and felt a tightness in her chest. Her whole life had changed the day she found out she was pregnant. She had given up on dreams. She had worked double shifts. She had learned to be a mother and father at the same time, all while he continued his privileged life, oblivious to his daughter's existence. Maybe he didn't know, a voice whispered inside her. Maybe he had no choice. At 6 in the morning, when the sky was just beginning to lighten, Rachel was already up, showered, and getting dressed meticulously. She decided not to wear her work uniform. If she was going to face Joseph Harrington, she would do it as Rachel Carter, not as an employee. She put on a simple but elegant dress, one of the few she had kept from her life before becoming a mother, when she could afford small luxuries. Mrs. Henderson arrived punctually at 7, surprised to find Rachel already ready. "I have to leave early today," Rachel explained, trying to sound casual. "Can you take Annie to daycare later?" "Of course," the older woman nodded, studying her with curiosity. "You look different, more dressed up than usual." "I have an important meeting," she replied evasively, kissing Annie's forehead while she was still asleep. "I'll be back as soon as I can." The drive to the Harrington estate seemed shorter than ever. Every foot the bus travelled accelerated Rachel's pulse. When she finally got off in front of the imposing gates, she noticed a detail that heightened her anxiety. Next to the central fountain was an elegant black Audi that she hadn't seen before. He had already arrived. Instead of the service entrance, this time she headed for the front door. Before she could ring the doorbell, Carol opened the door with a look of surprise. "Rachel, we were expecting you at the side entrance, and not so early," she commented, noticing her attire. "Aren't you wearing your uniform?" "Mrs. Harrington told me to be here at 8, she replied, ignoring the question about the uniform. "Is she home?" Carol nodded, still confused. In the main living room, but without waiting for more explanations, Rachel walked through the entryway. She knew the way to the main living room. Her feet carried her almost automatically while her mind processed what was about to happen. She stopped in front of the double doors, listening to muffled voices from inside. For an instant, the urge to run away was almost irresistible. She could turn around, disappear, look for another job. But the image of Annie materialized in her mind. Her daughter deserved to know her father. She deserved the chance to have a complete family. Taking a deep breath, she knocked on the door. "Come in," Elizabeth's voice replied. The living room was exactly as she remembered it from the first day, with one crucial exception. Next to the fireplace, with his back to the door, was a tall man dressed in an impeccable grey suit. At the sound of the door opening, he turned slowly. And there he was. Joseph Harrington. Mike. Annie's father. 5 years had passed, but they seemed to have evaporated in an instant. His green eyes, the same as his daughter's, fixed on Rachel with a mixture of disbelief, confusion, and something deeper she couldn't decipher. "Rachel," he murmured, as if he were seeing a ghost. The silence that followed was absolute. Elizabeth watched the scene from her armchair, tense but expectant. Carol, who had followed Rachel, remained in the doorway with a perplexed expression. "Carol, leave us alone, please," Elizabeth ordered, without taking her eyes off the two young people. When the housekeeper left, closing the door behind her, Rachel took a step forward. "Hello, Mike," she said, deliberately using the false name. "Or should I say, Joseph Harrington?" The man visibly paled. His eyes darted from Rachel to his mother, looking for an explanation. "Mum, what does this mean? How—" His voice cracked. "Our new housekeeper turned out to be an old acquaintance of yours," Elizabeth explained with studied calm. "She recognized your portrait just yesterday." Joseph ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Rachel remembered well, and that she had seen repeated countless times in Annie when she was nervous. "I don't understand. How did you get here?" he asked Rachel directly. "I answered a job ad," she replied, maintaining her composure despite her racing heart. "I never imagined I would end up working in your house. I never knew who you really were, not even your real name." Joseph walked toward her, stopping 3 feet away. His eyes studied her intensely, as if memorizing every detail of her face. "5 years," he murmured, more to himself than to her. 5 years, 2 months, and 14 days, Rachel specified, surprising herself with the accuracy of her mental count. "Since you disappeared without an explanation." Guilt and pain crossed Joseph's face like a shadow. "I didn't have a choice," he began, but Rachel interrupted him. "There's always a choice," she retorted firmly. "You could have told me the truth. You could have said goodbye, at least." "Rachel, please." He tried to move closer, but she stepped back. "I'm not here for recriminations," she declared, straightening her back. "I'm here for Annie." Confusion clouded Joseph's eyes. "Annie?" Elizabeth, who until then had remained silent, intervened in a serene but authoritative voice. "Your daughter, Joseph. Annie is 4 years old." The impact of the revelation was like a physical blow. Joseph staggered slightly, looking for support in the back of a nearby armchair. His face reflected pure emotion. "My—" He couldn't finish the question, his gaze fixed on Rachel, looking for confirmation or denial. "Our daughter," she confirmed, without taking her eyes off his. "I found out I was pregnant weeks after you disappeared. I tried to find you, but without success. I only knew your false name, Mike." Joseph sank into the armchair, visibly overwhelmed. For a long minute, no one spoke. The ticking of the wall clock marked the time with relentless precision as 3 lives were reconfigured in that dense silence. "She has your eyes," Rachel finally added, her voice softening, "and your dimples when she smiles." Joseph looked up, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Where is she?" he asked in a whisper. Can I see her?" "She's at daycare now," Rachel replied. "And yes, you can see her. But first, I need to understand what happened. Why did you disappear like that? I owe it to her, and I owe it to myself." Joseph looked briefly at his mother, as if seeking permission or perhaps courage. Elizabeth nodded almost imperceptibly. "I never wanted to leave you," he began, his voice firmer now. "Those 3 months with you were the most authentic of my life. For the first time, someone saw me for who I was, not for my last name or my bank account." "I didn't know anything about your last name or your bank account," Rachel countered. "I just knew you were Mike, a man who said he worked in finance and who made me laugh." Joseph gave a sad smile. "That was the most real part. My job is in finance, although not as an employee, but as an owner. And making you laugh, that's what I liked most." He got up, walking toward the window. The morning light illuminated his profile, revealing lines of tension that hadn't been there 5 years ago. "My grandfather became seriously ill," he explained, looking out at the garden. "The patriarch, the founder of the Harrington Empire. On his deathbed, he made me promise that I would take my place in the family business, that I would continue his legacy." "And did that mean abandoning the one you loved?" Rachel asked. Joseph turned to her with a tormented expression. "No, that came later. My father." He looked briefly at his mother, who visibly tensed. "My father investigated who I was dating. When he found out you were a waitress with no connections or fortune, he gave me an ultimatum. End our relationship immediately, or he would disinherit me. He would throw me out of the family." "And you chose the fortune?" Disappointment was in Rachel's voice. "No," Joseph replied vehemently. "I chose responsibility. Hundreds of families depended on the Harrington companies. My dying grandfather was counting on me. The promise I had made." He ran a hand over his face, visibly distressed. "I tried to find a solution. I thought I could convince my father with time, that I could make him understand. But he was relentless," he continued. "He threatened not only to disinherit me, but to destroy your life too. He had the power to do it, Rachel. He could make sure that no business in the city would ever hire you." Elizabeth then got up, approaching her son. "Your father was a man from another era, with very ingrained ideas about social differences," she explained in a tense voice. "I'm not justifying him. I'm just trying to make you understand, Rachel. For Edward, lineage and family connections were everything." "So you left without a word," Rachel concluded, fighting the lump in her throat. "The most difficult decision of my life," Joseph affirmed, his eyes fixed on hers. "I thought it was the best thing for you, that you could move on, find someone who could love you openly without obstacles." "But you never knew about Annie," Rachel murmured. "If I had known—" Joseph left the sentence unfinished, but the determination in his gaze completed the thought. "What would you have done?" Rachel pressed, needing to hear it. "I would have defied everything," he replied without hesitation. "I would have given up the last name, the fortune, everything. For my daughter. For you." The silence enveloped them again, less tense now, filled with unrealized possibilities and untaken paths. "Edward passed away 3 years ago," Elizabeth interjected. "Things are different now. I'm different." Rachel nodded, processing all this new information. The story was incredible, and yet it explained so much. The abrupt disappearance, the coincidence of the preserved coaster, Elizabeth's enigmatic words about Joseph locking himself in his room. "Can I meet her today?" Joseph asked, with a mixture of anxiety and hope that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "Annie, can I meet my daughter?" Rachel looked at him closely, evaluating the sincerity in his eyes. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, but with one condition," she replied firmly. "I need to be sure that you won't disappear from her life like you did from mine. Annie deserves a present father, not just an illustrious last name or a bank account." "I promise you," Joseph declared, approaching her until he was in front of her. "I'll never leave again. In fact—" He paused, as if carefully considering his next words. "In fact, if you'll allow me, I'd like to be part of your life too. Of both of your lives. Completely." Rachel felt her heart race. 5 years of resentment began to dissolve in the face of the intensity and sincerity of his gaze. The same gaze that had captivated her from the first day at the coffee shop. "Step by step," she replied, allowing herself to give a small smile. "First, Annie has to meet her father." Little Sunshine's daycare was located in a modest but cheerful building, with colourful murals decorating its exterior walls. Rachel and Joseph remained in the car for a moment, parked in front of the entrance. The contrast between the luxurious Audi and the simple neighbourhood setting couldn't have been more obvious. "So this is where she spends her mornings," Joseph commented, observing the building with genuine interest. "Monday through Friday from 8 to 2, Rachel nodded. "It's a good place. The teachers love her and she has friends." Joseph nodded, tapping his fingers nervously on the steering wheel. How will you introduce me?" he asked, the uncertainty evident in his voice. It was a question that Rachel had been considering for the entire drive. How to introduce a father who had never been present. How to explain such a complicated situation to a 4-year-old girl. "For now, just as a friend," she finally replied. "Annie is smart, but she's also sensitive. We need to go slowly." Joseph seemed disappointed, but he nodded understandingly. "You're right. I can't just show up and expect her to accept me as her father," he acknowledged. "It'll be whatever you say." Rachel appreciated his respect for her decision. It was a good start. "There's something else you should know before you meet her," she added, turning to look directly at him. "Annie knows she has a father. She asks about you sometimes, and I've told her that you had to go far away. I've never spoken badly about you." Joseph looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and remorse. "Thank you for that," he said softly. "I don't deserve it." "I didn't do it for you," Rachel clarified. "I did it for her. No child deserves to grow up thinking their father abandoned them because he didn't want them." Joseph nodded solemnly. He understood what Rachel had sacrificed, even her own right to bitterness, for her daughter's emotional well-being. "Are you ready?" she asked, reaching for the door handle. "No," he admitted with a nervous laugh, "but I'll never be more ready than I am now." They entered the building together, maintaining a respectful distance between them. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with colourful glasses, greeted Rachel familiarly. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter. Are you picking up Annie so early?" "Yes, Gloria. We have a family engagement today," she replied, aware of Joseph's gaze on her. "Of course. The little one is in the art room with Ms. Teresa," Gloria informed her, looking curiously at the elegant man accompanying Rachel. "Just a moment, I'll call her." As they waited, Joseph observed every detail of the place. The children's drawings taped to the walls, the small chairs, the shelves with colourful books. It was a world completely foreign to his experience, and yet it was the world where his daughter had spent a large part of her short life. How long has she been coming here? He asked in a low voice. Since she was 2, Rachel replied. Before that, Mrs. Henderson, our neighbour, would watch her. But when she started talking and needed more stimulation, I looked for this place. They have a scholarship program for single mothers. Joseph took in this information in silence, each detail another piece of the puzzle of the life he had missed. A door opened and a small figure appeared running down the hallway. "Mummy!" Annie exclaimed, throwing herself into Rachel's arms. Joseph held his breath. It was like looking in a mirror that reflected his own childhood. The same intense green eyes, the same brown hair with slight waves, even the shape of her chin. And when she smiled, there were the dimples she had inherited from him. Annie, feeling a gaze on her, turned curiously toward the stranger. She observed him with that disarming frankness typical of children, studying him as if trying to place him in some familiar category. "Hi," she finally greeted, without letting go of her mother's hand. Joseph knelt down to her level, struggling to maintain his composure, despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "Hi, Annie," he replied in a soft voice. "My name is Joseph. I'm a friend of your mum's." The little girl tilted her head, considering this information. "A friend from before or from now?" she asked, surprising both adults with her perception. Joseph looked briefly at Rachel, looking for guidance. "From before," she replied. "Joseph and I met a long time ago, before you were born." Annie nodded, apparently satisfied with the explanation. "Why are you coming to get me with Mommy?" she continued, her curiosity insatiable. "Because," Joseph searched for the right words, "because I wanted to meet you. Your mum has told me a lot about you." This seemed to intrigue the little girl, who turned to Rachel. "Did you tell him I can count to 100?" she asked proudly. "I didn't have time to tell him about all your talents," Rachel smiled. "Maybe you can show him some." Annie considered this proposal and then, in an unexpected gesture, extended her free hand to Joseph. "Come on, I'll show you my drawing," she offered. Joseph took the small hand with infinite delicacy, as if it were the most fragile and precious object in the world. His eyes met Rachel's over Annie's head, conveying a silent gratitude that went beyond words. Miss Teresa welcomed them into the art room, where several children were working on their projects. Annie guided them to a table where a half-finished drawing was waiting, a house with a garden full of multicolored flowers. "This is our house," Annie explained, pointing to a structure that, despite its childlike simplicity, showed a sense of proportion unusual for her age. "And these are Mommy and me." Joseph observed the drawing, noticing a third figure barely sketched in a corner. "And who is this?" he asked, pointing to the sketch. Annie lowered her gaze, suddenly shy. "It's my daddy," she replied in a low voice. "Mommy says he's far away, but sometimes I draw him as if he were with us." The impact of these words was like a punch to the stomach for Joseph. He felt a lump in his throat and had to make a superhuman effort not to break down and cry right there. "It's a beautiful drawing," he managed to say, his voice barely controlled. "You have so much talent." Annie smiled at the compliment, revealing those dimples identical to his again. "Do you want to help me finish it?" she offered, extending a green crayon. "I'd love to," Joseph replied, accepting the crayon as if it were an invaluable treasure. For the next half hour, father and daughter worked on the drawing together. Joseph followed Annie's directions, marveling at her creativity and the confidence with which she directed the project. Rachel watched them from a discreet distance, with a mixture of conflicting emotions: joy at seeing Annie connect so naturally with her father, nostalgia for the lost years, and uncertainty about what the future would hold for them. When they finished, Annie looked at the result with satisfaction. Now it's perfect, she declared. Do you like it, Mummy? Rachel came closer to examine the drawing. The father figure, once a mere sketch in the corner, was now completely drawn and placed next to the figures of Annie and Rachel. The three of them were holding hands in front of the house. It's beautiful, sweetie, she replied, feeling a lump in her throat. Miss Teresa then approached to announce that it was snack time. Annie seemed to hesitate between staying with her new company or joining her friends. Go get your snack, Rachel encouraged her. We'll wait for you here. When Annie walked away, Joseph finally let out a shaky sigh. She's incredible, he murmured, without taking his eyes off the small figure who was now sitting with other children. She's perfect, Rachel. Absolutely perfect. She is, she nodded with obvious pride. She's smart, creative, and has the biggest heart I've ever known. She's had you as an example, Joseph replied, turning to her. You've done an extraordinary job raising her alone. The compliment, said with such sincerity, momentarily disarmed Rachel's defenses. It hasn't been easy, she admitted, but every sacrifice has been worth it. She's my everything. I want to be a part of her life, Joseph declared firmly, in whatever way you consider appropriate, with whatever conditions you set. But I want to be present. I want to get to know her, watch her grow, support her. Rachel studied his face, looking for any sign of hesitation, but she only found sincere determination. And when you get tired of playing family man? When the responsibilities pile up and your privileged world claims you back? She asked, giving voice to her deepest fears. I'll never get tired, he replied without hesitation. I'm not playing, Rachel. This is the most serious thing I've ever done in my life. He moved a little closer, keeping his voice low but intense. 5 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life by walking away. I won't make that mistake twice. Rachel wanted to believe him. A part of her, the one that held the memory of that man who had made her laugh and dream, wanted to trust his words. But another part, the one that had learned to survive alone, warned her about the fragility of promises. Time will tell, she finally replied. Joseph accepted this answer with a nod. It was fair. He would have to prove with actions, not just words, that he was committed for the long haul. Can I ask you something else? He said, after a brief silence. Where do you live? The question took Rachel by surprise. In a small apartment in the south of the city. 2 bedrooms, one for us, and one that I use as a studio when I do freelance graphic design work, she replied, wondering where he was going with this. Would you consider moving? Joseph asked carefully. To a bigger place, closer to Annie's school, maybe with a yard where she can play. Rachel tensed immediately. I don't need your charity, Joseph, she replied coldly. We've survived perfectly well these 5 years. It's not charity, he was quick to clarify. It's responsibility. My responsibility as Annie's father. I want to provide her with the best possible life, the best resources, the best opportunities. Opportunities aren't bought with money, Rachel countered. I know, Joseph conceded, but some doors open more easily with it. And it's not just about money. It's about time, about presence, about commitment. He paused, carefully choosing his next words. I'm not suggesting you accept anything from me directly. I could set up a trust for Annie, for her education and well-being. Rachel considered the proposal. As much as she wanted to reject it out of pride, she couldn't deny that it would provide her daughter with security and opportunities that she herself could hardly offer. I need to think about it, she finally replied. This is a lot to process in such a short time. Joseph nodded, respecting her space. Of course. There's no rush. The rest of the visit went by in a delicate balance. When Annie returned from her snack, she showed Joseph her other drawings and told him about her friends and her classes. He listened with genuine attention, asking questions and showing interest in every detail of her life. When it was time to say goodbye, Joseph knelt down to Annie's level again. "It was a pleasure meeting you," he said, with a smile that barely hid his emotion. "I hope we can see each other again soon." "Will you come visit me again?" the little girl asked hopefully. "If your mum thinks it's okay," he replied, looking at Rachel. "Of course," she nodded. "Joseph can visit us whenever he wants." Annie, in a gesture that surprised both adults, came closer and gave Joseph a small hug. "I liked drawing with you," she said simply. Joseph closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the feeling of hugging his daughter for the first time. "I really liked it too," he replied in a slightly broken voice. "Very much." As they walked to the car, Joseph remained in a thoughtful silence. It wasn't until they were inside that he finally spoke. "Thank you," he said simply, "for letting me meet her, for not keeping her away from me despite everything." "Annie deserves to know her father," Rachel replied, "and you deserve to know her." He drove in silence for a few minutes before adding, "What happens now, Joseph?" It was a question loaded with meaning, one that went beyond the immediate practical arrangements. "Now," he replied, with a new determination in his voice. "Now we build a future. Together, if possible. Separately, if that's what you prefer. But always with Annie at the center." A month had completely transformed their lives. Spring was advancing in the city, filling the parks with flowers and the air with promises, as Rachel, Joseph, and Annie discovered a new way of being a family together. Joseph had kept his word. Every day, without fail, he found time to visit Annie, whether by taking her to daycare in the mornings or spending afternoons with her in the park near Rachel's apartment. The little girl, with that amazing capacity for adaptation typical of childhood, had accepted his presence with growing naturalness. Rachel watched this relationship blossom from a prudent distance. She still had some reservations, but she couldn't deny Joseph's devotion to his daughter. Nor could she ignore how Annie's presence had transformed the businessman. His expression softened, his laughter became more spontaneous. His eyes shone with a joy she hadn't seen in him even during those 3 months they were together 5 years ago. This Saturday morning, Rachel was finishing making breakfast when the doorbell rang. Annie ran excitedly to the door. "It's Daddy!" she exclaimed, using that term for the first time to refer to Joseph. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. It had only been a week since they had decided to explain the truth to Annie, in a simple and age-appropriate way. "Joseph isn't just a friend," they had told her. "He's your daddy, who has been far away, but now he's back to be with you." Annie had processed this information with surprising calmness, as if she had somehow sensed it all along. Her questions had been few and direct. "Are you going to go away again?" To which Joseph had replied, with barely contained tears, "Never again, Princess. Never again." Rachel opened the door, meeting Joseph, who was holding a bouquet of wildflowers and a small box wrapped in colourful paper. "Good morning," he greeted, with that smile that, despite everything, still made her heart race. "Ready for our outing?" "Yes," Annie replied, jumping excitedly. "Are they for me?" she asked, pointing to the box. "The gift is for you," Joseph confirmed, handing it to her. "And the flowers?" "They're for Mommy," Annie completed confidently, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Joseph and Rachel exchanged a look, surprised by the observation. "That's right," he nodded, offering the bouquet to Rachel. "To thank you for today." Rachel accepted the flowers, feeling a slight blush rise to her cheeks. It was the first time she had agreed to an outing, just the three of them, outside the city. A picnic at a nearby lake, Joseph's idea to celebrate the first month since their reunion. "Thank you," she murmured, looking for a vase while Annie enthusiastically opened her gift, a small professional art kit with watercolors, brushes, and a drawing pad. "Now I can paint the lake," the little girl exclaimed, amazed. As Annie gathered her things for the day, Joseph approached Rachel in the kitchen. "Are you sure about this?" he asked in a low voice. "If you'd rather it be just a daddy-daughter day, I'll understand." Rachel shook her head. "It's okay," she replied. "I think it will be good for Annie to see us. Together. As friends, at least." Joseph nodded, although something in his gaze suggested he was hoping for more than friendship. Over these weeks, he had been carefully respectful, focusing exclusively on building his relationship with Annie. But Rachel wasn't blind to the looks he gave her when he thought she wasn't watching, or the way he found little excuses to prolong their conversations. The trip to the lake was surprisingly pleasant. Annie, from her car seat in the back, kept up a constant conversation, telling stories from daycare and asking questions about everything she saw along the way. Joseph replied with infinite patience, explaining every detail with a dedication that moved Rachel. "Did you know that Daddy used to draw like me when he was little?" Annie commented suddenly. "Grandma Elizabeth told me." The mention of Elizabeth Harrington made Rachel tense up slightly. The relationship with her former and brief employer had evolved in an unexpected way. After the initial resistance, Elizabeth had fallen for her granddaughter's charm, regularly inviting her to the mansion for tea and cookies that invariably ended with Annie showing her her latest drawings and Elizabeth showing her photographs of Joseph when he was a child. "It's true," Joseph confirmed, looking briefly at Rachel. "I wanted to be an architect before I went into finance." "Why didn't you become an architect?" Annie asked, with the disarming sincerity typical of children. A brief but dense silence filled the car. It was an innocent question that touched the core of painful decisions and untaken paths. "Sometimes, sweetie," Joseph finally replied, "adults make decisions that we think are the right ones at the time. But then life teaches us that there were other possible paths." Rachel looked at him, surprised by the depth and honesty of his answer. "Like when you went far away?" Annie insisted. "Exactly like that," Joseph nodded, his voice slightly hoarse. "But now I'm here, and I'm not going to make the same mistake twice." These words hung in the air between them as the car pulled into a parking area next to the lake. The place was idyllic, crystal clear water reflecting the clear sky, leafy trees offering generous shade, and a gentle breeze that rippled the surface of the water. They set up their picnic under a large oak tree. Annie, fascinated by the surroundings, immediately set about exploring, always under the watchful eyes of her parents. "It's incredible how much she looks like you," Rachel commented, watching the little girl crouch down to examine a flower with absolute concentration. "That curiosity, that way of analyzing everything, is completely yours." "But she has your determination," Joseph replied, "and your compassion. The other day I saw her share her snack with a child who had forgotten theirs, that she got from you, without a doubt." They shared a smile, perhaps the first truly complicit one since their reunion. After eating, Annie asked for permission to use her new watercolors. While the little girl painted, absorbed, a few feet away, Joseph took the moment to talk. "Rachel, there's something important I want to tell you," he began, his tone suddenly serious. She looked at him expectantly, sensing that this moment had been building for weeks. "I'm listening." Joseph took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what we had, what we lost, what we could have." "Joseph," Rachel began, but he raised a hand gently. Please let me finish. I need to say this, he asked. During these 5 years, there wasn't a single day that I didn't think about you. I kept that coaster with your name on it as my most prized possession. I tried to forget you, to move on like my father wanted, but I couldn't. He paused, looking briefly toward Annie to make sure she was engrossed in her painting. And now we have Annie, our daughter, the most important person for both of us, he continued. But there's also us, Rachel. That's something that started in a coffee shop 5 years ago and, at least for me, never really ended. Rachel felt her heart pounding, torn between the desire to protect herself and the hope that, despite everything, had never completely disappeared. What exactly are you proposing? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. A second chance, he replied simply. For us, not for Annie, although she would benefit the most if it worked, but for ourselves, for what we feel, for what I believe we both still feel. He extended his hand over the picnic blanket, leaving it there, halfway between them. An invitation, not a demand. I don't expect an immediate answer, he added. I just want you to know where I stand, what I feel, what I hope for. Rachel looked at his outstretched hand, feeling the weight of the decision. 5 years of loneliness, of struggle, of building defenses around her heart. But also 5 years of love for her daughter's father, a love she had tried to bury, but that was still there, latent. I'm scared, she finally admitted. Of trusting again, of losing again. I know, he nodded. And you have every right to have doubts. I'm only asking you one thing. Don't let fear decide for you. We already lost 5 years because of other people's wrong decisions. Let's not lose another day. At that moment, Annie came running back, with her drawing in one hand and a wild flower in the other. Look, she exclaimed, proudly showing her work, a watercolor of the lake, with 3 figures holding hands along the shore. It's beautiful, sweetie, Rachel smiled, hugging her. It's us, Annie explained, pointing to the figures. You, me, and Daddy. A family. Joseph and Rachel exchanged a meaningful look over their daughter's head. A family. Annie's words, so simple and yet so profound, resonated between them. Can we come again? The little girl asked. All 3 of us? Of course, Joseph replied, hugging her too. In that shared embrace, something changed. Rachel felt the last barriers begin to crumble. With an almost imperceptible movement, she extended her hand to find Joseph's, interlacing her fingers with his. The contact, after 5 years, sent an electric current through them both. Joseph looked at her, a silent question in his eyes. Step by step, she murmured, repeating the words he had used that first day at the mansion. But together? The smile that lit up Joseph's face was like the sunrise after an endless night. The return to the city, with Annie asleep in the back seat, passed in a knowing silence, their hands clasped over the gear shift. There's something else I want to show you, Joseph said, when they stopped in front of Rachel's building. Can I come up for a moment, after you put Annie to bed? Intrigued, Rachel agreed. Once in the apartment, with her daughter soundly asleep in her bed, Joseph took an envelope out of his jacket. I've been working on this for weeks, he explained, handing it to her. I wanted it to be perfect before I showed it to you. Rachel opened the envelope with curiosity. Inside, she found detailed architectural plans. At first, she didn't understand, but upon closer examination, she recognized elements. A large studio with natural light, a children's room with space for games, an open kitchen like the one she had always dreamed of. It's a house, she murmured, looking up, confused. What is it? It's my first project as an architect, Joseph explained, with a sparkle in his eyes she had never seen. I've decided to go back to my dream, Rachel. The Harrington companies will continue to run with a team of competent administrators, but I want to build, to create, not just manage finances. Rachel turned the pages, amazed by the detail, by the beauty of the design. And this house? It's for us, he confirmed. If you want it, if you give us that chance. Designed with everything you love in mind. Natural light for your graphic design work. Open spaces like you always talked about. A yard where Annie can play. Joseph, this is... Rachel was at a loss for words. I'm not buying your affection with a house, he quickly clarified. It's a symbol that I'm willing to completely rebuild my life, to follow my true passions, to create something beautiful for our family, if you give me that chance. Rachel put the plans on the table, and on an impulse that surprised them both, she went to him and kissed him, a soft, tentative kiss at first, which soon transformed into something deeper, filled with 5 years of longing and a future that was beginning to take shape before them. When they separated, both had tears in their eyes. Is that a yes? He asked, with a shaky smile. It's a let's build it together, she replied. Our house, our life, our future. The three of us. Through the open window, the spring breeze gently swayed the curtains. In the next room, Annie slept peacefully, with a smile on her lips, as if she somehow knew that her drawing by the lake had become reality. They were finally a family. And on the wall above the small living room table, placed in a simple frame, the coaster with the handwritten name, Rachel, had found its final home. It was no longer a painful memory of what could have been, but the first chapter of a story that was just beginning.